go ahead and get started. So welcome to the Learn to Love documentation session. This is Ashley Kolodziej, sorry. She is the lead interactive designer at Boston University's Interactive Design Department and loves to code, design, and teaching others. She's maybe the only person on this earth that gets excited to write documentation. She frequently works with large school redesigns, most recently Boston University's College of Communication, as well as works to feature articles for the Bostonia and research editorial properties. And I'm going to go ahead and remind you to silence your phones, and there's surveys up here, paper ones, for after the session. There will also be a link. If you click on per session on the website, it should show up 30 minutes after the session starts. And lastly, Ashley has provided a URL at the top of this slide where you can go and ask questions, and she'll answer them at the end of her session. Yep.
Perfect. Well, I'm Ashley Kolodziej. I'm a lead designer at Boston University's Interactive Design Department, and I'm super excited to talk to you today about documentation. And I realize how ridiculous that sounds. Because I'm a designer. Why am I not talking about design or usability or maybe even building things? I don't know. Documentation seems like an odd topic, right? Well, as it turns out, I'm actually going to be talking about all of those things. Because you can't talk about documentation without talking about the design, the UI, the way people get through the product, and even how you built it. And to illustrate that point, I'm actually going to talk a little bit about Boston driving. Now, has anybody here besides my two colleagues over there had the privilege of driving in Boston? Oh, excellent. So you're all going to get this talk very, very well. Driving in Boston is really rough for those who haven't done it. There's lots of one-way streets. It's all sort of a circular, spokey thing. It's very confusing. Unlike the very nice streets of Sarasota, which are all in a nice grid with nice, big, beautiful street signs. Anyway, commuting is on the brain because I just moved, so I have to relearn my whole commute from my house to Boston University. And the first thing that I do when I do that is I pull up Google Maps, as anyone would. Google Maps is great. I love Google Maps. It gives me a nice set of directions from point A to point B. But because I'm not familiar with this area, I'm not exactly sure, what turn right on Ferry Street means or how long I have to go down Eastern Avenue. So Google Maps very helpfully provides a map. And that gives me a much better sense of the general direction I'm going and some cues that I need for those directions. And if we think about documentation, this is where most people stop. They provide a list of directions, and they provide a few UI screenshots. And they say, okay, yeah, that's pretty good. So, if that's the case, I should be fine in Boston, right? That should be all I need. Let's see how it goes. Now, first couple directions are pretty easy. Turn left, turn right. There's a grid here. Eventually, I'm going to get to an intersection. And by the way, this is a real intersection in Boston, where 5 streets intersect. And I'm going to get the direction, turn left onto Dorchester Street. By the way, I'm on Dorchester Avenue. This is a great labeling problem, right? If I'm on Dorchester Avenue and Dorchester Street, suddenly it's like, oh, well, maybe I'm just going kind of like straight left. Or, maybe one of the other 2 lefts. Which left am I supposed to take here? Who knows? Well, as it turns out, the answer is the closest one. And that's sort of interesting, right? The closest one. That's the sort of direction a human would give me. But Google Maps doesn't do that. And this is the real value you can provide in documentation. It is super easy to provide a list of directions. It's very, very hard to empathize and put yourself in the driver's seat and say, okay, what sort of direction would make the most sense to me as I'm coming up to this intersection? And that's why most people in Boston and most people driving in general will have somebody hold Google Maps and navigate for them, because they'll have someone to sit there and say, okay, how do I make this make sense to the driver as they're coming up to the intersection, as they're in that experience, and they can't necessarily quickly process what might be going on at a 5-point intersection. Because when you have a nice UI, nice big grid, with beautiful easy streets, they're aligned north to south, as in New York or in Sarasota, your very nice town. Things are really easy and you might not have to do as much of that. When your UI is a little more like that, you need to do a little more empathizing. You need to explain things a little better and make sure you get right in that situation where your users are. I cut up off the bottom part of this, but you can go look it up yourself, because I hear this is a family-friendly presentation. So, as I said, it's easy to write a list of directions. It's very, very hard to write good documentation. And the other thing to take away from this is that you may have noticed there were no street signs in that intersection. There was nothing. There was no UI for that intersection aside from roads going each and every which way. So, if you think about that, that means that designers, the people who make the street signs visible, developers, the people who decide 5 streets should intersect at the same time, and the UI UXers, I mean, you guys know what you do, street signs and the experience of driving in Boston, whatever that is, you're all responsible for documentation. And I think that's something that's easy to forget sometimes. We're all a part of the documentation world, and all of our decisions affect what documentation ends up looking like. So how do we do it better? The first thing we can do is redefine documentation. Most people think of documentation as, again, that list of directions and those UI screenshots. But really, the goal of documentation is to teach someone how to do something. If you haven't taught someone how to get from point A to point B, your directions have failed, your documentation has failed. So if you can't do that, it doesn't work. And that also means that there's not just wikis and articles and lists of tutorials that make up documentation. There is so much more. And we saw a little bit of that in the driving example. But I'm going to show you a number of examples that help do that within the UI in WordPress and throughout documentation that you may build for an API or a theme or something. Again, best documentation empathizes with your users. Put yourself in your user's position, put yourself in how they're going to use it, and you will write good documentation. So let's go through some things that you really should be doing with documentation. So thing number 1, put your documentation where your users go. This seems pretty obvious, but it's basically everywhere. Everywhere your user might be, there should be some sort of documentation there. Couple examples of that, put it in the code. Super easy, right? Comment your code. Start explaining what's going on in your code and why you're doing it. And remember, this isn't just restating what your code is doing specifically. Your code is literally a list of directions, so we don't want to do that again. Talk a little bit about your intention behind your code and what it's meant to be used for. You can even empathize a little. This is a comment I wrote for a part of our responsive framework. I work a lot with SaaS, so I do a lot of this sort of thing. And when you get up to this line, if you're digging around in the code and you're ripping things apart and trying to see what you can override and how you can build things, which, by the way, is what you do often as a developer working with code, you might run across this crazy long width line here. And that's scary. No one wants to override that. So I say, okay, look, I get that. This looks scary. But really, you should be looking at these variables. This is what it's doing. It's okay. If you really still want to override this, go ahead and do it. But this is how it works. So use that sort of documentation to guide people through the hairier stuff. For end users, I'll be talking about both developers and end users today. For end users, you can put it in the UI. Basically, wherever they're going to make a big decision and you can't be there to handhold them through it, you're going to want to leave a note about what you would recommend and why. So here, we use the WordPress Customizer API to talk about different navigation layouts for a theme that I don't have control over after I hand it off to the client. It's going to be applied to a bunch of sites, and they're going to have to make the decisions about which navigation layout to choose. So here I say, choose the top one if you have a limited number of nav items. If you don't, if you have a lot of them, and I can't control that because they do it themselves, pick this other one. At least that way I can help them out with that decision and hope they make the right decision when the time comes. If you're interested in this sort of thing, the Customizer API is really great to work with. It's also just a great UI tool because it gives immediate feedback on the decisions you're making in real time in this sort of left-hand area right over here. So you can see before you publish it on the site what things look like. You can put it in the UI. We use meta boxes pretty heavily at Boston University, and specifically we use a framework called CMB2, which makes it a lot easier to put meta boxes into the WordPress UI. It's a really great framework. It's easy to use. You can build your own meta boxes too, but it really helps with clients entering content in a nice way. And you can even go so far as to create a layout builder with it. I know Shane mentioned that in his presentation. We haven't gotten that far yet. We're mostly still here with meta boxes. But you'll notice here that in the labeling, I have some recommended image sizes because that's where people are uploading the photos. That's where they're going to make the decision, what photo size should I upload? And if there's anywhere you want that information to be, it's right next to that upload button. So use things like the placeholders, the meta information, even labeling, like featured image 1, and I have just a little icon here showing where in the layout it will show up. Those are things that you can use to give that immediate feedback and sort of document how things will work without writing a full long list of documentation. Put it in the admin bar, right next to that edit button or your new button. Documentation. Documentation everywhere. If you set up a resource for clients to look through, what we more traditionally think of as documentation with all of your available functions and shortcodes and the like, that is where the link for it should go. Because if you just do like a PDF or a Word doc that you email to someone, or you just kind of like put it in the site and never see it again, it's going to get lost. And sometime later, they're going to come back up to you and say, oh no, someone in our department just quit and nobody knows how to use the site anymore. That's where you put it. So, things you can do, number 2. Provide a reference. And this is the part where people go like, oh, documentation. I have to put together the whole reference. This actually isn't so bad. There's some really good tools to help you out with this. But you really need one. Every good thing that you use has a reference. Even the English language. Think about the dictionary, right? For years and years and years, we've had the dictionary as a reference for all the words in the English language and what they mean and how to use them. So unless you think your product is better than the English language, in which case I'd really like to hear from you, do this. You should. In your reference, you can think about the dictionary or the thesaurus or encyclopedias as something to base the general ideas you want in your reference materials from. If you think about those, they're very easily searchable. They're very well organized, and they're easy to scan. So make sure those things are reflected in your reference material. Here, WordPress.org does an excellent job with their code reference. You can see they have a search bar. You can search through all of their code. But you can also do different methods of filtering, and they have other methods of grouping as well. So you may know the exact name of a thing, and you just want to look up what parameters go into it, and that's great. You search for it, you get it right away. But you might be like, oh, well, I need to do something with custom menus, but I'm not sure exactly what it is. I probably need a filter of some sort or a function. You can filter by that, and that will help you out a lot. This type of documentation is used by a lot of people, and they don't always know exactly what the thing is they're looking for, or exactly what something does. So searchability helps a lot with that. Searchability in the UI for the end user experience might look something like this. At Boston University, we've been experimenting with a plugin called Shortcake, Shortcode UI. It's actually a candidate for a framework, or not framework, WordPress core inclusion. And what it does is it provides a UI for people to enter information into shortcodes, which is really great. It makes a big difference, and it helps a lot, especially with really hairy ones like we have a course feed shortcode that gets really hairy with all the different options you can put into it. And this is a huge help to it. But you might notice that just like the WordPress.org reference we just looked at, this is a reference of all the shortcodes you have available to you, all the content types you have available to you. And you do have a search function right in this upper right-hand corner here, where you can search through if it starts getting really long and find what that item is. That's definitely a huge help to give your users, and if you're already using Shortcake, you've already put together that reference for them. You just need to tell them where it is. For the big reference stuff, it is a big job to do by yourself, and you don't want to have to do it by yourself. So consider tools that can help you out. Again, I live in the SAS world, so I love SassDoc. They have similar generators for PHP and JS. But what it will do is it will take your code comments. You've been commenting your code, right? Just like I told you in the beginning of the presentation. Specially formatted code comments will actually generate all of this for you. So you tell things what group to be in, and they don't necessarily have to be in the same place in the code. All of these variables in our framework live in one single variables partial, and things like placeholders live in another place. But I've grouped them together in this grid area because that's how designers are going to use them and understand them. That's what they affect. So that's how they're grouped in there. Anyway, you can make those smart groupings, and you can go through and provide code examples. You can talk about who built what, if you need to track down somebody who built something in an odd way, and you find out later. That's a great thing. And you'll notice it even has that search that I've been talking about up there. That's all pre-built for you. So I strongly recommend looking at SassDoc, PHPDoc, and the like, and seeing how it can work for you if you're having trouble building this reference. Show them how to use it. Provide code examples is basically what this boils down to. This is one that I see people skip a lot, and it's really tough because, again, as developers, as users, in order to learn something and understand it, we're going to try it and break it and put it together in different ways. And what we need to do that is have a starting point to start from. Otherwise, we're going to spend an hour figuring out that initial base point. So one thing you can really help do, no matter whether it's an end user or a developer, is just provide that code example. And even better, provide an example of the output so that they can understand and start bending and breaking things in that way. The Stripe API is really great for this. I'll return to this example a couple of times because they do an excellent job on a number of different things. But you can see that in this dark area to the right, they have an example request and an example response. So if you make a request and you say, I want things with the name of t-shirt, you're going to get that in the example response and in that object, and you can work with it. And that's all right next to create a product, so you can see exactly what that's doing. For end users, that might look like this. An easy way to do this is just by documenting in WordPress. If you have a shortcode and you want to show users how it looks, you don't have to take a screenshot. You already have the shortcode that'll render it. So put the shortcode right in the content and put it right next to the documentation. And right there, you have your example code and your example output without even having to really do much work. It makes it a lot easier. So definitely consider documenting in WordPress for things that your client might need for that client reference. Things you should really do, number 3, set up consistent conventions. This is really, really crucial because, especially if you're using a tool like SassDoc, you want to know right from the beginning exactly what things should look like, how they should be formatted, and where they will go. Same goes for if you do documentation on GitHub, which we also do a little bit of. And my favorite example of this is actually the 4 Dummies books. In every whatever 4 Dummies book you read, you're going to get a page very similar to this, and it just says conventions and icons used in this book. And they put it right at the beginning so that you know exactly what you're looking at any time, what the design of something means, and if you get through it, what things you can skip if you already know something. It's really, really great. And it's important to have this defined early because your users are going to be looking through and reading through this documentation, and you want things to be consistent so that you can see a little inline code block versus a long inline code block. I like in GitHub or in Markdown using block quotes for explaining the why of things. So you can skip those if you want. It's kind of a different visual treatment for those different ideas. that you might want to sort of use. As far as design goes, make it easy to scan. Again, Stripe does an excellent job of this. Design is really important in documentation because it is very, very information dense, and it can be really tough to get through. If you don't have a good amount of white space, good headings, things that make it easier to skip sections and get through everything. So as you're designing your documentation, if you have control over things, think about things like white space, your typography, your ability to jump from section to section. Try just scrolling through quickly and seeing if it's easy to stop at a certain point where you see something. And make sure that you can click around and just jump from point to point so it's easy to get from to and from things. SassDoc does let you have this sort of control over things. There's a theming option, so that is something you can do. It's pretty good out of the box, but I definitely prefer stripes. You can see that they have a nice big bold heading up there. They've got lots of white space here, and then this attributes is really nice and clean and easy to scan. You can see the borders are really nice. It's easy to see that those are very distinct chunks of information. And even looking at how the formatting is done, it's clear what is code and what is not, which is awesome. They did a really excellent job with this. Your actual documentation descriptions should be short and simple and sweet. And they should try not to use technical or jargon as much as possible. And I know that's hard to avoid sometimes, but you're not the only person looking at this documentation. I know I refer to documentation even for things outside my area of expertise, just to see what's possible, so that I don't promise something to a client that isn't possible, you know? So I'll quickly go through and be like, okay, well, what can this do? And that question, what can this do? It's important that you answer that in a way that everybody can understand. So that if I go to your documentation, if a project manager goes to your documentation, everybody's on the same page. Or even a new developer or somebody who just doesn't want to think through all the very technical terms in your code. The dictionary is great at this. The dictionary casts a wide net, right? And it says, I'm going to try to explain this word to you in many different ways. I'm going to say it's this, and it's that, and it's that. And one of those is probably going to make sense to you. So in your documentation, especially if you're documenting for someone very new to something, try explaining it in a couple different ways. We all have sort of different worldviews and different ways of learning, and it's important to make sure that we present things in that manner and make sure that we accommodate all of those as well. Oh, sure. And if that's not exciting enough for you, which I personally think is plenty exciting, but I can see why you would maybe not want to hear a whole ton about that documentation. There's actually so many different ways that you can teach people things. And I would include those in documentation as well. So, you can make a game of it. Literally, make a game of it. This is actually an app that's forthcoming from Apple, and it's purely based around learning Swift. They want to teach kids to learn the basics of programming, and, you know, being Apple and wanting to promote Swift, they've done so in Swift. And it's really cool, right? You actually use this code to move your character around and through the game. So here they're teaching about for loops. You can see some really cool design things going here, where you've got the nice indicator in the bar here that kind of just feels like a loopy sort of thing, right? It's neat. So you could just, you can extend documentation in really interesting and different ways and use it to teach people in a really kind of cool and fun and exciting way. If you don't have time for an app, start your own style guide. I love style guides. Yeah. I know. This is one that's on my list to do. If you have designers you're working with and you want to make sure all your UI components are very consistent and stay the same throughout the project, style guides are the way to do it. They'll also give you good references for your developers if you have to pass things off to them. That's really great. That's a fun way to do documentation that isn't the same old. So you could try that. Teach an old dog new tricks. I don't know, are you guys Slack users in here? Most of you? Yeah. You guys know about Slackbot then. For those that don't, in Slack, there's actually a bot that you can ask questions to, and they'll sort of help you through setup and things like that. And this is something I've been really interested in, right? I haven't had a chance to try it out, but Slack actually has an API, and as do many other services like GitHub, that could theoretically talk to each other, right? So I get a lot of questions on Slack like, is this documented? Where is this? Do you have documentation on the grid? Of course I have documentation on the grid. But people don't go to find it in the documentation, they go to ask me because it's the easiest answer possible, right? You want the information nice and quickly if you're working on something so you can get on with your job, and I am the quickest answer right now. So I'm hoping Slackbot can help me with this at some point. That would be great. You might like it too. It's definitely something to explore. Or make a playground. Playgrounds are really fun, right? How many of you guys learned on W3 schools? I know I did. It's maybe, I've heard debates on whether or not it's the best source of information, but one thing they do great, and one reason why it's so successful, is that they have a try it editor. You try something, it renders out the HTML, you see exactly what happens. This is huge for learning, right? You change one thing, and you immediately see what happened with it. And we did a baby steps version of this back in our couple things that you should be doing with your documentation, right? We said provide a code example, and then after that, what you do is provide the output that it gives you. With try it editors, or in this case, a playground, you put that stuff right in there, and immediately, without even thinking, it compiles it and just shows what happens. So you'll see I've written some code about my bunnies here, my pet bunnies. Nellie and Peppermint Patty. And so my bunnies, they'll hop, they'll flop, they'll do the bun Olympics when they're very active. But what this will do, this is Sass by the way, Sassmeister, is it will compile my Sass. I don't have to set up a compiler, I don't have to get Sass running or install anything. Excuse me while I throw things around, because I'm very excited about Sass. They'll just show me exactly what happens right there and then. So this is definitely huge for learning. So you may have noticed that by this point, I haven't actually talked about the reasons to love documentation. I just talked a lot about how to do it. And there's lots and lots and lots of reasons to love documentation. It makes your users more self-sufficient. Your debugging is going to take a lot less time, right? If you go and you say, this is something that's going wrong, I'm going to go look it up real quick and see what the intention was, that makes things a lot easier. It protects your brand. If you're into that sort of thing in marketing and you don't want big flashy GIFs and colors everywhere and stuff, it'll help you out with that. It protects your hard work. If you worked really hard to build something and you put all these thoughts into these features and you're like, yeah, people can extend it and they can do this and they can modify this code and stuff, and then somebody kind of darts along and is like, well, I don't know how to do this and I can't find it, so I'm just going to do it my own way. And then you're like, oh, what did I do that for? Oh, and it's so frustrating. It protects you from that. And then just in general, it's a really cool problem with lots of solutions. So you can go and you can do documentation the normal way with all the lists and the stuff and that, or you can build a game. There's a lot to do in there. But that's not why I love documentation. To get to the reason why I love documentation, you really have to look at why it is that we do what we do. Now, I know that I didn't get into education. I sort of got into it by accident, right? I took the job and I was, sort of sick of the way I was working with agency life. I wanted something a little bit more slower and thoughtful. And I just sort of accidentally ended up in academia when somebody was like, well, maybe you should take a job at a university. That sounds pretty good. Even though I ended up at Boston University sort of by accident, I stayed for a reason. And I think we all do, right? If you've stayed for a couple of years, you stay in academia for a reason. And for me, That reason is that I believe strongly in the power of education and the power of learning. I think that that's what can fix the world, right? Us sharing our knowledge and telling other people our stories, what we know, what we've learned. And although I am not a teacher by name, I'm not a professor, that's not in my title, I am a designer. You know, I'm a designer talking about documentation. Every single day, I do have the opportunity to push that forward, to sort of contribute to that mission and share my knowledge. And part of that is in documentation. So I'm very grateful for the opportunity that documentation gives me to share that knowledge. And I think that everyone in here, every single person, has some sort of knowledge or something to share, some sort of story, because we all experience things differently. And we all have a unique perspective on things. So if you take nothing else from this talk, I hope that you will take away that you do have the opportunity to share that knowledge with people, and that you do have expertise that people should hear. So I hope you will share it with people. Thank you. Let's see if where'd my questions go? Continue reset. Did nobody ask any questions?
You're just so cute.
Documentation.
Very well done.
All right.
So when you showed the documentation link in the dashboard, how did you create that?
That is an excellent question for one of our developers. I work closely with developers at Boston University, and I tried to go look up the function for it, and I completely forgot about it. So, actually, do you know how, Andrew? I'm going to put you on the spot.
What site is it on? I'll look it up.
It's on both Com and Com Sister.
Alright, I'll take a look.
And is the actual documentation, is that a link off to something else, or it's right there in the WordPress dashboard?
On the College of Communication site, what I referred to as Com just now, it's actually within WordPress. That link is just a link to anywhere, right? So you can point it wherever you want. And in Com, I just put it in WordPress right within the site. I actually don't like that approach super much because it mixes documentation content with client content. So I've moved to putting documentation in a separate place on our WordPress network that uses the same theme. So it has the same benefits as putting it directly on the site, but it doesn't mix the content together. So on the other site, the Com Sister theme, which is where I showed the documentation button, it actually links off to a different site that has the documentation separate.
So there's an admin bar menu action that you can hook in to add items to that admin bar.
Perfect. Thank you, Andrew. These guys are great, by the way. Yes?
But do you build the actual that page? Is it like an HTML page, or is it another Word? Is it using posts or pages?
I just use straight pages.
Okay.
Super easy.
And then you use
HTML
an
is
nav bar to sort of like a one page. You use a nav bar to go for the content and.
yeah, exactly. Or if you have your documentation set on the site, you can set it up as separate pages, and it'll show up in the nav bar just like regular navigation, right? So super easy, and then you don't have to worry about the HTML, which I find is kind of hard to maintain. Yes, please.
You have great examples of things like the games and the playgrounds, which I'm sure we've all played with those sorts of things.
Yeah.
But what's the best way to create those? Those things are really interactive and they're great, but they're available from those services that probably have a huge development team doing it. And number two, I guess, is there a way to do it within WordPress?
That's exactly what I would like to know. Please let me know if you find out, because I would love to see that happen. I don't personally know how to do it. I haven't gotten that far in sort of my documentation journey yet, but it's on my list for sure.
Not quite up to the level of those games and stuff, but if you use stuff like CodePen or something like that, you can share interactive examples. So that's a great way to give people the code and let them play with it.
Oh, that's true. SassMeister does that as well.
What's that?
SassMeister, the SAS compiler that I showed.
So at Mary Washington, we're redoing our documentation again for like the millionth time,
Yes.
and we use a plugin called Documenter, and it has its pros and cons. It can be a little buggy, but it creates kind of like that nice kind of clickable guide that you can click through for different steps. But I was just wondering if there are any plugins that you use like specifically for documentation, or if you just create it all yourself.
For WordPress, no, I haven't run across a documentation plugin that I love yet. I could definitely do some more research into that. Most of my documentation so far has been within the responsive framework, so I'm documenting a theme for other people to use and build upon. So my focus has been there, which is why I talk about SassDoc so much. But so far, working in WordPress and in the content has actually worked pretty well for us. There's probably other ways to do it, possibly better ways. So definitely keep looking and see what else is out there. Ah, really? Did I go that fast? Oh, okay. Oh, no worries. Did you guys get lots of good information anyway?
Excellent.
Okay, good.
You have beautiful slides.
Oh, thank you. Use Google Slides.
One more about what you were using. When you were showing documentation of your code examples, there's a beautiful typography and all that.
Yeah.
There seems to be can you re-mention what the platform you were using for that was?
So let's take a look at.
It has Dr. Pen.
Stripe. Stripe API there, yeah.
Oh, Stripe, okay.
I'm not sure what platform they're using there. That's a really good question.
We have Discord.
You could probably get a similar look and feel with SassDoc if you did enough massaging in a SassDoc theme to do that, or in a WordPress theme. I mean, all of these are customizable, right? So you could theoretically put together a WordPress theme that looks like this and has a similar look and feel and similar, like, really pleasant experience for scrolling through documentation. I don't know if I've seen a documentation platform yet that looks this beautiful, so there's probably some good stuff out there. I just haven't run across it yet, so please share if you find it. I'd love to see it.
Is Boston University's documentation, could the public see that if they happen to Google the right term?
Some of it, yes. So it depends on which part of the documentation is you're talking about. The SassDoc documentation, the stuff for the responsive framework, is actually out there, and you can actually see the URL right in the slide, so you can go peek at that. It's still in progress, so don't be too judgy about it.
Is that a concern though? Or no, I didn't want to look at it, I'm just worried about, is it a concern that somebody could view it that you don't want to?
It could be. I mean, it depends on what you're documenting. So if you're documenting something very sensitive, you're going to want to lock it down, right?
Yeah.
And that's a benefit for us of working in WordPress. If we're documenting something very sensitive, we actually have a plugin that helps lock that down and say only specific users can see this.
Yeah.
So that's the way I would treat it for those things.
Use roles or something.
Yeah.
Which plugin are you using for that?
That's
The
those
UX
guys.
control.
Okay,
And that's on the WordPress repository.
okay.
Oh, okay, I wasn't sure if it was open sourced or not.
BU Access Control.
It's a really excellent plugin for that sort of thing.
It's a private plugin, I don't think.
That's not public?
No.
Content restrict. One of them is public.
There's
So
restricted
section editing.
restricted site access is public, and it just adds something to the reading settings, so you can set it to be logged in users only to WordPress. And then you can decide if non-logged in users get sent to the login screen, get sent to a specific page, or whatever.
Oh, we've got a section. Section editing is public. BU section editing, and that lets you have certain sections of content access to certain groups of editors.
Oh, okay.
That is public.
Restrict Content Pro is a big plugin too, like Evan Williamson. It's what a lot of the developers use.
All the plugins are used.
Thank you.
Of course. Any other good plugins I don't know about? We can just talk about plugins for a while. I love having these conversations.
Oh, yeah, so what we do is we have a wiki, and we pull that into WordPress website and we have a search on that site, but the search is brutal. Its results are terrible and it's really slow. So I was wondering, does anyone have a good search plugin for that? Because if we had that, our documentation would be decent.
Is the documentation within WordPress?
It's on a wiki. Is how we have it there. So
Is it a public wiki? Public?
it's public.
Yeah, we're sort of trying to adopt Google Site Search. Just allow, site with the URL, but with Google Site Search, you sort of get a custom search engine. If it's public, that's a great way to do it.
What do you use for private? Because
For
that's,
private, we actually had a GSA, which is a Google Search appliance, although they're trying to deprecate that, so that's not really as useful.
Because it would be nice, like, we use the Google site search for the public content, but then, like you were saying, make it so that people can find, like, we have tutorials and stuff that they're behind a login.
Right.
So I wonder if anyone has any ideas on how to make that searchable for people.
You could use Elasticsearch if it was within WordPress,
Okay,
but that's a little bit complicated setup.
okay. Thank you.
Any more questions? Things to discuss? Yes.
I guess a personal question, but if you work for VU and you have a WordPress website, you can't just add any plugin, right? It's just the ones that you all allow us.
These guys keep me under control. I suggest plugins, and as do many of our users, and it goes through a whole vetting process where they make sure it's up to WordPress code and security, and that it's all allowable within the VU network, and plenty of them get denied. So, but that means the ones that I've suggested and we use are really great. So there's that.
Thank you.